Well, good evening, everybody. This is what I always liked. The very first time I came to Horizon House was what I called the happy buzz. So you've been buzzing, and that's a happy sound. Welcome, welcome. I'm introducing myself. I'm Peter Shapiro, a member of the Neighborhoods Committee, which is the producing group of this project. Tonight's program is about the creation of low-income housing at Magnuson Park. But more broadly, it's about the legacy of Frank Chopp, who represented this community for 30 years. Low-income housing at Magnuson Park is the direct result of Frank's tireless advocacy and lawmaking. When the Naval Air Station was shut down and became Magnuson Park, Frank created a coalition of housing providers, each of whom dealt with a particular group of people. And he was very skillful in putting the coalition together. The result has been a conversion of what were the barracks at the Naval Air Station that had just been shut down, or actually many years earlier had been shut down. But finally they got to work on creating low-income housing out of the existing naval residential facilities. So, for example, the enlisted barracks became homes for homeless people, singles. Come up, Representative Scott, please. There were two buildings which were arranged for bachelor quarters, and so they were larger apartments than the ones where the listed personnel had been, bachelor officer quarters, and those became housing for small families. Now then there was this wonderful fact that there were three large residential type houses, really large, which of course in naval tradition were appropriated for the base commander, the lieutenant commander, and some other big piece of brass. And those were ideal for housing teens. There were two age groups of teens being served, one organization, and expectant mothers or recent mothers who had been driven out of their home by abuse. So how sweet is that we're able to do that? When Frank and I talked over lunch here last April about tonight's proposed program, he was, of course, eager to include his latest initiative, that's Frank, which is creating home ownership opportunities for people of color whose families had experienced generations of racial discrimination. He had already picked a corner of Magnuson Park for this housing, and he partnered with people we will be meeting today from the Homestead Community Land Trust. So tonight we'll hear first from Mercy Housing Northwest, which is providing homes for very low-income families in what used to be the Building 9 when it was in military use. And we will welcome for that Joe Thompson. Would you stand and show your face? There's Joe Thompson, who's the CEO. Welcome, Joe. And Clara Martinez, who is the manager of client services for Mercy Housing Northwest. For the second half of the program, we have Kathleen Hosfeld, who is the CEO of the Homestead Community Land Trust. And I have his name here somewhere. Connor Manning. Graydon. Oh, my bad. Okay, Graydon. Good. You're just as well with your name, but Graydon's the right one. Okay. Okay. And he's the property developer in the Homestead Land Trust area. But first, I'm going to welcome to the podium our two current representatives in Olympia. And would you please come up and grab the mic for a while and to tell us something about what you want to have us know. So we'll start with Nicole, and come on up, Scott, also.
Thank you so much, Peter. Hi, everyone. I am Nicole Macri, and I am your state representative here in the 43rd Legislative District, and it is so great to be here. And I am delighted to be joined by Representative Sean Scott, who just joined us in the legislature after a resounding victory being elected by the voters of the 43rd Legislative District last November. And what a session it was. Well, I will say Representative Scott is the historian of this duo here, so I am sure he will have some profound words to say. And he did an amazing retrospective that was published in The Stranger about Representative Chopp just in the last week. So if you haven't seen that, I really recommend that you take a look at that. I just wanted to say that this has been an incredibly challenging time for many of us who serve in the legislature, and particularly for those of us who were close with Frank. I had the great honor of serving in the legislature for 8 years alongside Frank. And it was, the greatest honor of my life, really, to be considered a partner and a friend to him. In many ways, Frank was one of the greatest mentors that I ever had. We found a lot of kinship in our work together. Of course, I knew Frank for many, many years before I came to the legislature, because I've worked in homelessness services and housing and social services for many years. And so we ran in similar circles, but we really didn't get to work closely together quite as much as when I joined the legislature. When I came in, Frank, of course, had been the longtime Speaker of the House, and how lucky was I to be the seatmate to the Speaker of the House. And we got to conspire on many good projects together. But what I quickly learned is that Frank, while he loved this city and he loved this district, he really loved this entire state. So you can't go too far in any direction in the city of Seattle without laying eyes on a project that Frank Chopp helped to get built. So if you've been around town lately, this high-rise affordable housing on the corner of Madison and Boylston, this beautiful building called The Rise, the first high-rise affordable housing building built in over 50 years here in Seattle. Frank had a hand in that. You may have seen the beautiful new apartments at the base of the Pacific Tower building up on Beacon Hill. Frank worked for many years to get that done. And there are dozens and dozens of projects across this city. But if you travel across the state, you will learn about the many, many projects that Frank had his hand in cities across this entire state. He was committed to making sure that everyone had a safe place to live and that everybody had access to health care. He's accomplished more for working people, for people who want to go to college, and for people in need in the state than any person. His legacy will live on a really long time. And I find myself now waking up every morning wondering what Frank would do and how he would spend his day. I'm not kidding, especially since we've come back from Olympia, and I've tried to challenge myself to get into a little bit of good trouble and push some of my colleagues in elected office to do the right thing. I had a good opportunity to do that this weekend when there was some kerfuffle about making sure that the folks from Share's Tent City had a good place to land. And we ensured that they did. Because I thought, what would Frank do in this situation? And I started making some phone calls. So I hope that we will continue to live out his legacy for a long time to come. And I do want to make sure you all know that there will be a public memorial for Frank coming up in just a few weeks on Sunday, June 1st at the Maidenbauer Convention Center in Bellevue. And I will make sure to get the information so that way it can be shared for those of you who'd like to attend. It will also be televised on TVW, which is our public access station. It will be live streamed. So for those of you who are not able to join but would like to see that. And now I will pass it on to Representative Scott.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Representative Macri. I did have the chance this legislative session, my first legislative session, to see up close Representative Macri in action passing a bill for rent stabilization in the state of Washington, which I think is as important a part of the equation that we're talking about here with our focus on helping low-income folks, everyday folks, working people through the decisions that we make with respect to housing. And I know that that was an accomplishment that is going to help in a lot of ways to build on Speaker Emeritus Chopp's legacy, and was a huge accomplishment that I know was many years in the making. Yeah, we should absolutely clap for that. So I had the opportunity to also learn about Representative Chopp first through the newspapers and later as somebody who was a mentee of his beginning in 2021. And in some ways, I feel that there are two Representative Chopps, two Frank Chopps, two Speaker Emeritus Chopps. There was the institutionalist who was holding the gavel, whose voice was omnipresent on TVW for perhaps many years, somebody who was really synonymous with what the state legislature could do for everyday people. Really, where I bonded with Frank before following him into the state legislature was the other Frank Chopp, which was Frank the organizer, Frank the activist, Frank the guy who was building geodesic domes and squatting on private property, and Frank the troublemaker in a lot of ways. And of course, a lot of his motivation and his impetus for his career in public service came from his family's appreciation for the New Deal, from the policies of FDR. And so I find it tremendously inspiring that he was somebody that was guided into public service, not because he saw himself necessarily as an institutionalist or as an elected, but because he thought that he could organize the state of Washington into better outcomes for everyday people. This is relevant to me because we are seeing right now at the federal level an unprecedented attack on some of the hallmark institutions of our country, some of which were built during the 1930s and 1940s under the guidance of FDR, others that were directly inspired by him in the form of cash assistance programs that came from the Kennedy administration that was taking its cues from anti-poverty programs that started during the Great Depression. So we're really in a position, I think, to honor today and reflect on the legacy of somebody who can serve as an inspiration for future movements to make our country, make our state, make our city a more inclusive place through the legislative process like Frank did, somebody who thought well enough of progressive ideas like, you know, the idea of all kids having medical coverage, of college not being affordable but free for people in our state, of housing and home and hope, as he would call it, for everybody in our state. These are tremendously galvanizing ideas that will not lose relevancy as time goes on, but will in fact become more of an inspiration for more people who are looking to enter public service and bolster the institutions that we have, which are under attack, quite frankly, from an increasingly hostile federal climate. So it's great to be here with everybody to reflect on Frank's memory, and I know that we're going to have a great time tonight. And it's great to be back at Horizon House, I should say, as well. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Representative Scott, and thank you, Representative Macri. Thank you very much. And now it's time for the first half of our program, and I invite to the table or the podium, if any combination you want, Joe Thompson and Clara Martinez. Come on up.
Just connect. Should you just let me know when you're ready to click? And
Okay. Oh, I can click. I got it.
okay.
I got it.
You got your
We're
notes.
good.
I can click you.
Hello, everyone. So thank you so much. Thank you, Peter, and everyone on the committee for inviting us here tonight. I so appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about Mercy Housing Northwest and about the important legacy that Frank Chopp had for our organization. And one of the things I've learned is that there's hundreds of organizations that are saying that same thing because Frank made a difference. My name is Joe Thompson. I'm the president of Mercy Housing Northwest, and I've been really fortunate to have really made a career. I learned early in life what gave my life meaning, what gave me passion, and that was working in affordable housing. So I was really lucky early to be able to really fall into this this profession. And I started in it as a resident services coordinator in some buildings not too far from here. One called St. Martin's on Westlake, which is for homeless men over 55 years old. And I remember one of the things that was a real pleasure of mine as part of that job was every year for Housing Advocacy Day, I would take a group of the guys down to Olympia. So on some of those trips, I had the pleasure of introducing those folks to Frank Chopp, and he was amazing in his ability to ask really good questions and to listen and to really show joy and appreciation for these folks. And from those kinds of experiences, Frank kind of pretty quickly became a real true hero of mine. And flash forward a couple decades, and I had the opportunity 5 years ago to become president of Mercy Housing Northwest. And one of the first calls I got was from Frank, and I remember seeing on my phone, oh my God, it's Frank Chopp's calling me. What do I do here? And he welcomed me to the position, gave me some encouragement, and then gave me a list of about a dozen things that I needed to consider and a couple projects that he had for us that he just wanted to let me know more about. Yeah. And those calls over the last 5 years were pretty frequent, and some of them were just making sure that things were moving along. Others were really meaningful because it was both kind of the coaching and mentoring that I needed as a new leader in this position, and also the message of just of a true believer in what he was doing. And one of the things is they say you're not supposed to meet your heroes because they disappoint, and Frank never disappointed me. He inspired me, he encouraged me, and he helped really lead my organization to do some pretty incredible projects. And I can honestly say, so the one I'm going to talk about tonight is certainly one of those that, but for Frank, would not be. And I think there's at least 3, maybe 4. If you talk to Frank, he probably would have said 6 or 7 projects that wouldn't have happened without him in the last few years. And just really quick example of how amazing he was. So we had a really incredible project that's about ready to open its doors in about 2 months at the Angle Lake Light Rail Station. And it's an amazing partnership that will be affordable housing for families, but then 20% of the units will be for families or individuals with an intellectual or developmental disability. Yeah, and it's kind of the first project of its kind in the state. and Frank really helped advance that concept, and he helped coordinate a partnership with the ARC of King County, a really amazing organization, to be the service provider for those folks with intellectual or developmental disabilities in the building, and also to have a beautiful new home for their corporate office on the first floor of this building. There were so many challenges with that project, and at the 11th hour it looked like it maybe was not going to happen, and I just remember on a Friday at about 5:30 talking to Frank about it and saying, gosh, the ARC's board has called us an emergency meeting. If they feel they can't do this project now, the project is going to cave. And Frank spent the weekend calling individual board members, meeting with their board, and pushing it across the goal line. And I just remember saying, who does this? Who does this? What kind of a politician does this? And it's the kind that has true joy and true belief in what he's doing, and that was Frank. And so when we broke the ground on that project, we got him a little Heisman Trophy statue because he got the ball across the goal line for us, and I started affectionately referring to him as Beast Mode, which was Marshawn Lynch's nickname, and I don't know whether he enjoyed that award, but he sure seemed like he liked it. So so I wanted to talk a little bit tonight about Magnuson Place, but before we do that, I just wanted to say a little bit about my organization. So thanks. So you can advance through that. So Mercy Housing Northwest. So we have 54, I think, projects in the Northwest, really across, mostly in Western Washington, everywhere from Bellingham down to Vancouver. We do some projects in Oregon. We do some projects in Idaho. We have about 3,000 units that serve about 6,000 folks every day. Most of what we do is housing for families with children. All of it's affordable. I think one of the things that makes me most proud to work for Mercy Housing Northwest is that we don't just stop with the housing. We're not just a developer, but we own for the long haul. We manage our properties, and the thing I'm most proud of, we provide really incredible resident services at our properties, so that stability that the property can provide, and that affordable, stable base that the housing can provide, can be leveraged into all sorts of really amazing things, where families can really begin to work on not just what they need to do today to survive, but what they need to do tomorrow to thrive. And so that's one of the things I'm most proud of, and Clara's going to talk about that. So our mission and vision, I'll just say our mission is to develop housing, to provide housing, but really our mission is to change lives and trajectories of lives through that stable base that housing and that community can provide folks. So. So I wanted to talk a little bit about our project at Magnuson Park. So for a long time, this project was referred to as Building 9. And I guess that's because it was the 9th building that was constructed on that naval base. And so construction began in 1929, and it was really designed to support the U.S. Navy's efforts in World War I and then in World War II. So it was really a bustling barracks and a mess hall that served over 500 Navy enlistees. And really kind of in that way was one of the real heart and soul of that Naval Air Station. It is a huge structure, and I think this doesn't give it justice, but it is actually about 3.5 football fields long. So it is a massive building, 250,000 square feet in total. So when the base closed in 1991, that beautiful building that was such a beacon of the park and really part of the kind of the gateway to the naval base fell into real disrepair. So base closed in 1991, and you can see some of the effects of that. So really with the roof collapsing, rainwater, mold in the basement, all the historic finishes of the building failing, doors rotting, asbestos, hazardous materials, you name it. And there was also a lot of illegal activity and vandalism too taking place in the building. So there were some real challenges that the building presented to the community and to the city. So this is where Frank comes in, because there were a lot of ideas for what to do with this building initially, but affordable housing was not one of them. So there was ideas to convert it into market rate housing, to convert it into commercial kind of retail center, a whole lot of things, but not affordable housing. And that's where Frank really put his foot down and said, this is a public resource that needs to be used for the public good. And so really through Frank's force of will, the state then pivoted and put out a request for proposals for how this building should be used. And so in 2016, Mercy Housing Northwest was awarded the project. The land was transferred to us, and we began the really hard work of transforming something that looks like this into something that would be, once again, beautiful and something the community could be proud of. So the first step was to clear the building. So no small task. And that took about 4 months just to haul all the stuff out of the building, complicated by the fact that much of the stuff in the building were hazardous materials. And so this big semi-truck you see here, there were 134 other ones of those that hauled debris away from the building during that 4-month period. So 135 semi-trucks full of debris had to be cleared. But then you see, it got cleared. 4 months later, the building is clear. And now we can begin the process of creating something really beautiful and important. That process was really complicated, though, because the building had a historic designation, and so was on the National Register. And so the National Parks Service and Seattle Landmarks had to be involved. And so there were a series of plans that went forward and back and forward and back before all those parties landed on an approach to it. And so the beautiful end result of that is that we have a building really from the outside that looks much as it did back in the 30s and 40s when it was, and it's absolutely magnificent. So this is a picture of kind of the under the building, where we put this pretty elaborate drainage system in. And so things that had to be done in addition to all that debris that had to be removed, we had to create this drainage system. We had to make the building seismically secure. Basically, the building became really kind of the four walls, and then it was kind of built again from inside. And so hundreds and hundreds of windows had to be replaced. The roof had to be replaced. All sorts of things had to be rebuilt. So this, I think, was part of the mess hall and is now the community room. And so this is just a picture of it being cleared out and preserved. There's a picture of the roofs being done, and again, you get a sense of the scale of the building. And here's a sense of the scale. This is the middle of the building, and the other side has all that going the other way. So a huge building. And all that, the end result was it, Building 9 became Mercy Magnuson Place in 2019. Yeah, and that, I tell you, there's a couple things I'm glad for. One is I am so glad that we have this, and I am almost as glad that I didn't come to Mercy until it was finished, because it is about the most complicated project you could ever imagine. So I get the nice end benefit and didn't have to go through the pain and suffering of the process. So Mercy Magnuson Place is 148 apartments spread across those two 4-story wings. The apartments start about half of what market rate rent would be, and so the project serves folks from 30% area median income up to 60% area median income, so all very low income folks. There are studios. There's 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedrooms. I think the vast majority of units are 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, and that's really something that's really important to Mercy, because if we're going to do family housing, we need to do housing that is built for families. And so that's 2 and 3 bedroom units that are just not being built anywhere else on the open market. And then 20% of the units are reserved for people with disabilities. We didn't just stop at housing, because one of the things that I believe is it's really important to leverage that housing to help address other interrelated and really complex needs that communities have. And so also in that building there is a 6-classroom early learning center ran by Denise Louie Education Centers. There is a neighbor care clinic in the building too that serves the wider community. And then because the building is in that beautiful Magnuson Park, but one of the things about Magnuson Park is, and especially if you don't have reliable transportation, it's really a food desert. There are not a lot of grocery stores that are accessible. And so one of the things that we did is we partnered with the University District Food Bank there. And so once a week, they come in and we operate a really large food pantry that benefits not just our residents, but the residents and the entire surrounding community. So Mercy Magnuson Place is located in Magnuson Park, and this is a picture of one of the apartments, and so you kind of get to see the quality and the loveliness of that rehab. But it's in this large urban park, arguably one of the most beautiful places in Seattle. And what kid wouldn't want to grow up in a beautiful park like that? And we've really tried to leverage its location in the park and all the other things that go in the park. And so we've created partnerships with like the sail club, the tennis club, the paddling club, the soccer clubs, all those things to really benefit our kids out there. And so it's a resource-rich community that we wanted to make sure that our residents were welcomed and actively engaged in that community. So, just in closing for my portion of this, this was, as I said before, an incredibly complicated project, but I think it was also a powerful demonstration of one, an amazing leader in the community, but then real public goodwill and public desire to put resources to really transform this into something that really benefited Seattle and really benefited I think really benefited the park by making it a much more richer and diverse community out there. So not for the faint of heart, but it exemplifies what can happen when we resource a project well. And I'm going to say, put a plug in for Mercy when you have a really skilled, committed developer too. And really proud that in 2021, this project was awarded a national award for outstanding historic preservation. So they give this Charles Edson Award out. They only give one out every year, and this project was awarded it in 2021. Again, I think that's a testament to all those good things. I'm going to turn it over to Clara real quick now, and she gets to tell you. I get to tell you about the building, but she gets to tell you about the most important thing, and that's the people who live in the building.
Hi, everyone. Oh, I'll borrow that one. Hi, everyone. My name is Clara Arteaga Martinez. I'm a resident services manager with Mercy. I started off with Mercy about 5 years ago as an AmeriCorps in Bellingham, working with migrant and fishing families, which is really important. It's part of my history, right? My parents are farm workers from California. And so it was really important for me to be able to provide education and resources to a community that was very similar as mine. And you don't really get to do that in a lot of places. We don't really have a lot. Thank you. I appreciate it. We don't have a lot of communities like this in California, especially in the Central Valley where I grew up. And so being able to start off my career in education and housing in a program like this is really fantastic. But a couple years ago, I moved down to Seattle and I got to become the resident services coordinator at Magnuson. So last year I got promoted to a resident services manager. So I get to support the community that I got to support in a different way now. So I get to support the resident services coordinator every day that's on site, continuing to meet with my same residents and get to visit it and continue that relationship in a really meaningful way. But just like Joe said, right, along with housing, we really do provide resident services to the community. And that doesn't just mean meeting with resident, but it means providing any resources, any referrals, sometimes just being a listening ear or a shoulder for someone to engage in a conversation because they have nobody else. And so it's really important as part of our model to provide coordinated on-site services so that residents don't fall behind the cracks. You can live in affordable housing and you can still miss a month of rent. And that's a really big thing that continues to happen, right? You could lose your job, you could lose your childcare, and even if you're in affordable housing, it can become unaffordable very quickly. And so that's what our services really provide. All of these photos here are from our actual residents on actual programs that we had. And particular parts of resident services are what we call the pillars of resident services, which is youth development, health and wellness, housing success, and community engagement, financial well-being. So all of our resident services coordinators, not just at Magnuson Place, provide these essential services at all of our housing communities within different capacities, and really all of these aren't just, they're not a curriculum, it's really centered on what the need of that community is, what is engaging to them, and to the youth in that community. Because if we just provide programs on a blanket statement, residents are going to come, they're not going to be engaged, and they're not going to serve their needs. And so everything is geared to their needs. Every resident services coordinator really gets the ability to show their individuality, to build that relationship with their residents, and then develop programs. So we really take the time to train them to be able to communicate and engage with residents in the way that serves them the best. I'm going to talk about our commitment to the resident services, because it's a little bit more deeply than just providing a presentation. So, for example, for health, our health programs are really intended to increase access to healthcare, things like food security and mental health services. It's not just providing medical care. It's not just providing a clinic in the downstairs basement. We provide resident health surveys biannual or every 2 years. And so we get to know which of our residents have a primary care provider, which of our residents have access to health insurance and who doesn't, and be able to provide referrals, be able to bring in partners to be able to help and support with that. Magnuson Place has that neighbor care partnership. And so we invite neighbor care to our programs. We have them table, we have them come to events so that residents get to meet and get to know who their care providers are going to be. And then because that's open and available to the community as well, they oftentimes, we will encourage other community members to come and visit the clinic, get free vaccination. They do a lot of efforts around back to school time so that parents know what vaccination services their kids are going to need before they start the school. And just like Joe mentioned, we have the community food pantry. It's actually a collaboration between the University District Pantry, the YMCA, Mercy Housing, and Sandpoint. It's really self-run by about 20 to 30 year-round volunteers. We provide over 40 pounds of food to every single family that comes every week, and it's over 200 families currently on our roster being served every week. About 30 to 40% of those are outside community members, from Sandpoint Housing all the way up from Northgate. We have some folks that we build relationships with that are all the way from South Seattle who really utilize this pantry to get the services that we need. We also utilize the pea patch that's at Magnuson Park to be able to provide fresh produce at the pantry every single week. When we have the budget and the extra resources, we spend some of our program money to be able to buy more culturally responsive food. A lot of the community at Magnuson Place are Ethiopian families, and so a lot of the food that we eat here in America, they don't have access to, and they are not used to it. So in addition to the food pantry, we provide nutrition and cooking classes so that they're able to know what to do with all these things that we're giving them that they've never had access to before, which is really important. And vice versa, we welcome them to be able to teach us what to do with the teff flour that we buy, because we buy a lot of it. And so it's really great to build this relationship and this partnership with the families and have them teach us just as much as we're showing them. With housing success, like I said, affordable housing can become unaffordable very quickly for families in low-income housing. And so we provide coaching and housing assistance to be able to support with families. In regards to that, we also provide lease education. Oftentimes, a family will receive a notice without knowing what to do with it. And so we help them in providing that. Emergency resource referrals, right? So if they're in need of rental assistance and we don't have any assistance for them, we're able to refer them to our local partners. We have families that get support from St. Vincent de Paul, from local churches, from the 211 line. Really anything that we can do to get a family assistance, we try to do so. With housing assistance, we also support with the Denise Louis Education Center. They're constantly coming and helping provide childcare, and we provide referrals for families to be able to go. And so a lot of our families don't know that sometimes they can get priority because they live on property. And we actually have had residents who have started with their youth attending Denise Louis, and they've gotten employment through Denise Louis, and they're working on the property, they're living in the property, and their kiddos go to the local Sandpoint school afterwards. So it's really lovely to see that development and that growth. With community engagement, We don't want residents to just live on the property and just walk by our offices. We want to be able to engage with them and co-lead and encourage residents to be self-advocates, to be leaders in their community. And so we oftentimes really encourage residents to help plan a program, to lead a committee similarly to what you all do here today, and have a voice in the things that we're providing. Things like the clothing closet at Magnuson Place were something that we just started this year with my resident services coordinator. She's providing donations from the community with, from anything from professional clothing wear to coats to shoes, and residents are bringing in extra items that they have themselves and trading with residents, and it's all free. They don't have to go off site. They don't have to haul their donations to Goodwill or find transportation. They can do it right on property. And it's been a really great resource to have them and see that happen. Another way that we involve the community is we have the University of Sunrise Rotary, which I'm a Rotarian, and so we collaborate with them every single year. We run a block party serving over 300 different park members, not just Magnuson Place residents, but Sandpoint Housing residents as well. We host this giant block party, provide them all free food. We invite every single organization at the park to be able to provide referrals and access to everything that's happening at the park. Oftentimes our families will live on the park, will walk around the park and not know that Sail Sandpoint is right there and can get free sailing lessons or swimming lessons year round. So it's really great to provide that space so that they get to know what is accessible to them, not just walk by it and not know what it is. And I have some wonderful pictures from that, and if you're interested to volunteer, I can connect you. We're already starting planning for that. It's in July, so we start all the way in April so that we can get ready for July. For financial well-being, we provide financial education and counseling and housing. So we have presentations just like this where we bring in partners. We have US Bank coming in a couple weeks. We have a financial literacy partner that brings their own curriculum and sits one-on-one with families and shows them how to budget. Sometimes we have migrant families who have never used a checkbook, let alone a credit card. And so they're able to bring in a lot of resources and provide programming. Do you want to talk about Mercy Scholars? Something that we do in combination with all the adult services is Mercy Scholars. And so Mercy Scholars is actually how I started off with Mercy doing youth programming. So it provides support for youth development through educational after-school programs. We provide year-round programming around social emotional work, homework help, computer literacy, and even provide free back-to-school supplies so that families don't have to make that extra expense at the end of the summer. Not only that, we provide that support to be able to bridge the system between the school and the home. So we allow for staff to visit youth on site year-round, engage with the school staff. We do back-to-school nights where they get to meet their teachers, their principals, their counselors, their social workers, and really get to know everybody in the school at the property and not have to worry about transportation.
That's fantastic, and I have a mic that's working. So thank you so much, and we really appreciate what you're doing. Appreciate is a very inappropriate, insignificant, and insufficient way to describe what you guys are doing. Thank you very much for your time and for coming here. And I'll stay seated here, this comfortable seat, and go call on Kathleen and Graydon.
Now it's on. Hi. I am Kathleen Hosfeld, and I have many friends here at Horizon House, but my husband has more friends at Horizon House. My husband is Dave Beck of Classical King FM. So, yep. And he sends his regards. Love to all of you. So it's a real delight to be here with my colleague Graydon. We are going to be talking about a project that was very near and dear to Frank's heart. And we're going to tell you a little bit about community land trusts and what we do. But how we came to be here is that shortly after we lost Frank, I got this email from this guy named Peter. And he said, hey, I was a friend of Frank Chopp's, and we were going to do this thing at Horizon House about a projects that he had led at the work at Sandpoint. And he was, I invited him to do something completely different. And he said, but I got to tell you about this thing that I'm really excited about homeownership. And so that's how we came to be here tonight. It just so happened that Frank honored us with taking forward this project. And so just a little bit about, how many of you know a little bit about community land trusts? All right, good half to a third at least. Community land trusts, Homestead has been around for about 33 years. And as a homeownership organization, we have far fewer homes than Mercy. We're dwarfed by Mercy's size. We have 257 homes in our trusts. Yay! We are poised, however, to double that number over the next 5 years because we have been ramping up our production and our pipeline. We provide home ownership, subsidized home ownership for income qualified households. We strongly prioritize home ownership opportunities for people of color who have been shut out of home ownership. And we practice something called permanent affordability, which I will explain in just a minute. So there's Graydon and myself, and that's such small type that we're going to go right past this slide. So community land trusts are a thing in the United States. There's over 300 discrete community land trusts. There's an equal number of organizations that have been inspired by community land trusts to do permanent affordability. But we are a growing movement in the United States to remove land from the speculative market and keep it affordable permanently. Let's hear it for that. Thank you. So we focus at Homestead on home ownership as a public good that we are working to address. Community land trusts can be used for lots of things, but we focus on home ownership. And that has a number of wonderful impacts. First of all, it gives folks an opportunity to stabilize in place, build connections with their neighborhoods, build assets. They can build equity in their home and transition out of rental housing, which, as you know, doesn't necessarily build assets. And we find that folks, children and families that live in owned homes have great economic mobility. It is a two-generation solution. So adults as well as their children improve their health, economic, social, emotional outcomes living in an owned home. And in our communities, it's important because we are also addressing racial disparities in home ownership. How many of you have engaged with this topic over the last 5 years, especially since the loss of George Floyd through? So many, yeah, great. Homestead was doing this work long before that tragic event, but that galvanized a lot of folks to the realities that there are whole categories of folks in the United States that were shut out of the opportunity to own their own home because of their race. And that has a compounding effect over generations, such that now this is in King County, we have a 61% white ownership rate, but only 28% of Black people in King County have the opportunity to own their home. So we exist in part to put homeownership within reach of people who have been shut out of that opportunity by virtue of discrimination or the compounding impact of our crazy runaway housing market, as that you all know well. So what is a community land trust? A community land trust is a nonprofit, for sure, nonprofit. This is not a for-profit entity. We are private and membership-based. It's really important. If we're going to remove land from the speculative market, we don't want it to be privately controlled. We want it to be community controlled. And our mission is to acquire, hold, develop, lease, and steward land for making homes, farms, gardens, businesses, and other community assets permanently affordable for current and future generations. And we center the voice of those served by having a third of the seats on our actual governing board be held by our own homeowners in our program. And I just want to say that the folks who are on our boards from our program, that's not for show. That is not a second class of board membership. Our homeowner board members serve as officers of the board. The best treasurer that we've ever had was one of our own homeowners. So this is a board of equals, and we respect all of the members regardless of the income that they have. Where did this come from? I stand here as a person that grew up with a lot of privilege. As a white person, I grew up in Central Washington, had white collar parents. So I stand here deeply humbled and honored to grow and advance a solution that was created in the Deep South in the 1960s and early 70s by people who were involved in the civil rights movement. There was a thing that you might remember called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Representative John Lewis was part of this. Charles and Shirley Sherrod were part of this. And they, for whatever reason, I'm not sure why, maybe some of you know here, they had settled on Albany, Georgia, as kind of this place where a lot of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee activity was centered. And so they came to Albany. They were working to enroll people to vote, and they were working to get people to protest against segregation. And many of the folks they were working with were Black sharecroppers. When those sharecroppers registered to vote, they were thrown off their farms, meaning that they had no way to make a living and nowhere to live. Hundreds of, if not thousands of people were thrown off the land. Charles and Shirley Sherrod were the leaders of the movement locally in Albany. And this was the watershed moment where a lot of prior work that had come together researching safe ways for Black folks to own land, it all kind of culminated at this point, and they created the community land trust model, which puts that people entrust themselves to the safety of collectively owned land, so community owned land, with homes, farms, and businesses being owned individually on the land, and the land being leased. And I always want to give props to these folks who created this model, because it solved a particular problem that they were dealing with at the time, which was predation on Black folks that managed to own land or were completely shut out of ownership opportunities. And it dealt with what we call displacement. They didn't use that word at that point, but people, those sharecroppers, were displaced from their farms. So the community land trust model solved the problem that they were dealing with at that time, but then it got picked up and taken into urban areas. So out of the deep rural South, picked up, moved into Cleveland and into Boston. And there it became this amazing tool to prevent gentrification and displacement and wholesale displacement of people in the urban settings. So it comes down to us today in these high-cost markets like Seattle and San Francisco and Boston and New York as this amazing tool to create ownership and create affordable housing opportunities for people who would otherwise not have access to them, and in an income category that is not served by rental housing. This is for folks above 60% AMI. So Mercy doesn't serve these folks, and there is great need in our communities for folks at 60 to 80 and even up to 100% AMI to have a solution to their housing needs as well. It works on many housing types. Early in our program, we had single-family detached homes come into our program. Then we started building townhomes and cottage homes, and now we're working on 2 condominium-style homes. That's Graydon's area of expertise at Homestead. He's helping us get our Nest and Woodland View projects completed. And what we do specifically is when King County, City of Seattle, and Bellevue are selling homes for, $800,000 and above, we offer our homes at $275,000 to $340,000. So far below market, and I'm going to skip over the income guidelines. But here's an example of one of the projects we've built recently. This is in Tukwila. It's called the Southard. And these are cottage-style homes, very high quality. This is a net zero energy development. It is the first co-certified net zero energy and salmon safe affordable homeownership development in the United States. So the interiors are very high quality. We even are selling some of these homes at market rate, so it has finishes that are comparable with market rate. There's no difference between the affordable homes and the market rate homes. Just a few, and so here we are accepting the Salmon Safe certification. Mark Santos Johnson is one of our real estate development committee members. He played a key role in us working with Frank, and he saw this slide when we were getting ready. He wasn't able to be here tonight because of a family matter, but he saw this slide and said, "Oh, was this the slide you were going to use to talk about Frank?" And I said, "No, I was going to talk about the Salmon Safe certification because we're holding the salmon." He goes, "Well, but that's where this all started." And I was like, "Great point. Oh, that's fabulous." So we had our ribbon cutting for the Southard in June of last year. And Frank had been kind of talking about he wanted to do something new in the homeownership space, and he was talking to a lot of folks. But he came to this ribbon cutting, and he saw his friend Mark Santos Johnson there. And he said, "Oh, you're involved with Homestead. I got to talk to you." And so he talked to Mark about this idea that he had for doing homeownership at Sandpoint. And he said, "You got to get me a meeting with Kathleen and Eric and Graydon." And so Mark got I'm not that hard to get a meeting with. I'm just saying. But Mark brokered that conversation. And so this was the slide I was going to use to introduce Frank. This is Frank and Nancy at the event we had a couple of years ago with Henry Louis Gates, and we had this step and repeat, and Frank and Nancy got to come up and have their picture taken with Dr. Gates. So that's the beginning of when we were first talking to Frank, but not about this project. Frank was a little late to the party on homeownership. He made up for lost time. But some of his signature achievements led the way for the project that we're talking about now. So 1986, you all know this, he's instrumental in creating the Housing Trust Fund, right? Do you all know that Washington State and California led the country in creating the Housing Trust Fund? 47 states came after this, that it was established in Washington State. Yes, yes, please do applaud that. It's fantastic. So then came the Home and Hope program, mobilizing surplus property for affordable housing. Critical thing, Homestead has benefited from Frank's work in that regard since that was completed. And then more recently, he championed the Covenant Homeownership Program. How many of you have heard a little bit about that yet? Just at lunch this evening. Covenant Homeownership Program was passed in 2023. You probably didn't hear about it because it passed so quickly, and then it went into implementation. The Covenant Homeownership Program is what we call a special purpose credit program to address racial harms that came prior to the enactment of the Fair Housing Act. So prior to that time, as you all know and are aware, there were racially restrictive covenants on residential properties. And even if there weren't specific racially restrictive covenants, there were enough in most neighborhoods that it effectively shut folks out, right? So then came the Fair Housing Act, and those were no longer allowed, and they were, so they weren't allowed, and supposedly everyone could live where they wanted to. But as you know, the legacy of not being able to buy a home kept people from being ready and building intergenerational wealth to actually buy a home. So the Covenant Homeownership Program provides a form of reparations as down payment assistance to people whose families were here in Washington State and who were affected by these racially restrictive covenants. So folks who fit certain demographic profiles who were affected by the covenants can apply for this program and purchase a home with those funds. And Frank, and that directly leads into Frank's vision at Sandpoint. He also was instrumental in expanding the document recording fees, which help fund affordable housing, and the sound transit land legislation, which is kind of a next extension of the Home and Hope program. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Graydon. Are you? This is the property that Frank imagined that we would be able to develop affordable home ownership at Sandpoint. It's just off of the main, what is it? Yeah, Sandpoint Way. And it's fairly near the Lehigh Cottage Village, which was also one of Frank's champion projects out there. And what he had in mind was permanently affordable home ownership, priced affordably for those who make less than 80% of area median income, a priority for those who qualify under the Covenant Homeownership Program criteria. We can't necessarily use the actual funding on all of the homes, but we can make the homes apply to those who qualify for the criteria. Built on a vacant property at Sandpoint, and he wanted us to also think about off-site construction methods that might lower the cost of development. So now I'm going to hand it over to Graydon. And Graydon worked directly with Frank to explore his vision for this and to create the plans that you see here.
Thank you, Kathleen. Before I get into Sandpoint, I'm going to tell a quick Frank story. I met him in 2014. I was working on energy policy in Olympia, and we had a bill. It was called the Energy Efficiency Tax Exemption. And the program was to provide property tax relief for building owners, homeowners, multifamily owners that made investments in energy efficiency. It was kind of a novel concept, especially at the time. Green building was, just kind of taking off. And the bill made it further than any of us expected it to. Got out of committee, went through rules, and might be going to the House floor. So enter Frank Chopp. And we met with Frank, and he'd looked over the bill already when we got into the room and listened to our spiel, for 90 seconds or whatever, and then said, okay, so tell me about the affordability component. And me, my colleagues, we sat there with a dumb look on our face because we hadn't thought that far quite yet. And he said, yeah, not quite. And passed the bill back over and said, it needs work. And you need to integrate affordability into sustainability if you want this to really work. So that was the beginning of my exploration into affordable housing. And it converted me from an energy policy guy to an affordable, sustainable policy guy, and ultimately led to Homestead, to Kathleen, to a really, really cool organization, that is pretty novel in its approach to the green affordability crisis. So Frank, was a strong inspiration for me early on in my career, and guided me to a great outcome, with this relationship with Homestead. So I'll always remember him for that, and be appreciative that he was a guide like that early on in my career. So like Kathleen said, I had a great opportunity to meet with Frank a number of times and understand what his vision was for the Sandpoint homeownership project. What you see on screen, which is probably hard to see because small writing here and there, but it's a 50-unit homeownership project. The units are broken into 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units with kind of denser ones towards the top and 2s and 3s as you go down south on the site, with a community space. There's a green belt to the south, and of course park and great opportunities for kids and for outdoors all around, as the Mercy folks pointed out. So this was really early in the development process. We had been talking to Frank for about 2 months in specifics about this project when he passed. So it's early on, and we got a lot of really good intel from Frank, but it's at this stage. It's at a conceptual design block diagram type of stage. And what we all gathered our heads around, of course, after taking a few weeks to grieve, frankly, for his loss, we all kind of said, no, now this project is even more important than it was, when Frank was with us, to see his vision out and to make this project a reality as sort of the cherry on top of the Magnuson project. What Kathleen mentioned, and something that I think could be really exciting with this project and would be a great legacy to Frank, is the use of modular, off-site construction where you're building either wall systems and components of the building in a factory, so you're eliminating waste and producing a really tight building, all the way up to full modules, actual homes built in a factory, put on a truck, shipped to the site, picked up with a crane, and set on a foundation. It's been sort of a holy grail in the construction industry of, can we figure out modular? Is it going to be more cost effective than site construction at some point? And it was something that Frank cared a lot about. And he had done an amazing amount of research into modular providers and had all sorts of business cards for us to reach out to and say, oh, you got to talk to these guys. They're great. I toured their factory. So it's such a shame that he's not here, to see this project through, because it was really, really important to him. But we're gonna do that for him, and we're gonna make sure that this project comes to life, in Frank's memory. .
So this is a picture of one of the prototypes of housing that Frank had in mind. Our next steps are, frankly, to continue the feasibility analysis on the project, to figure out what can be done. We learned in our last meeting with Frank that the property that he had in mind is owned by Solid Ground. We need to reach out to them and ask them if they have plans for it. We think they may not. And then we'll be continuing to vet what we call our pro forma, which is a budget, fancy term for a budget. And we'll see if we can get this project off the ground. So with that, that's all we have.
So we realized two things, that we had a wealth of good presenters tonight, and that some of you, this would be the time you'd be retiring. So if you want to get up and leave, because that would be what your body needs to do right now, please do it. But we are going to spend some time with some questions that you might have for the panel. The panel is going to take their place up here. And so we have two people with microphones, and Nancy's eager to ask a question here. So we'll start off. Nancy. Here.
How is the current political climate? How are you responding to that with these wonderful plans that you have? And I just want to know what your feedback has been.
Oh, specifically on the Sandpoint project? We so far are undaunted because for the most part, our work is insulated from the federal government. We don't use federal money, and that's intentionally. Federal money comes with a lot of strings, and our projects aren't big enough scale to make those strings really worth it. So we have resisted the use of federal funds, and partly because the last time we tried to use federal funds was on a project in the Central District, and it was during Trump's first time in office, and he had so understaffed all the agencies that we needed to approve our environmental analysis, or what's called a NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act analysis, that they ultimately, there was nobody to certify it. And we had to forego $300,000 of funding at the very last minute on our project, and we lost money on the project. So that we said, never again. We are never making ourselves vulnerable to this again. So currently, we're very well insulated from it. We rely on local and state money, and as the legislators will be able to tell you, the capital budget that pays for housing is in much better shape than necessarily the operating budget. So that's our experience. Yeah.
Some of you may be too young to remember, but I'm looking at what you have just presented, and it is absolutely fabulous. But do you realize how close you came to not having that property at all? It was going to be a private airport. This was in the 70s. I remember because I was one of the volunteers who absolutely fought against it. There was a cadre of people in Laurelhurst and in Windermere and View Ridge and probably beyond, and some of us are here today. We live here today, who have been working on it, because when the Navy gave it up as an airport, there was a group of private plane owners who were very powerful, who had contacts in the city, and it was truly a battle to not have the property turned over to them, but have it turned over to what we have today as the Magnuson Park. And Senator Magnuson was instrumental in doing it. The final straw was the owner of the Kenmore Airport on a Sunday morning took his plane, his seaplane, and went bzzz along the shore of Windermere, of Laurelhurst, and back again, back and forth, back and forth. And when the vote came, it was defeated.
Nice. Thank you for your advocacy. Yay.
I'm wondering about money. You said you never took federal funds, and I'm thinking that money from the state and from the county and from the city was very likely federal funds.
It's not. Well, most of the money that comes from King County that we use is bonded against hotel motel tax. So the TOD funding. So that's a local source. City of Seattle is the Seattle City Voter Approved Housing Levy. Thank you, Seattle voters. And the state, the capital budget, the funding, perhaps Representative Scott can remind me what the source is for the capital funding at the state level. It's not federal funds. Housing Trust Fund, yeah. What's the source? Where do we get the capital budget money? Bonds. Yeah, so it's all local. It's not federal.
Okay, the second half of my question is, did you leverage private investment?
In a sense, all homeownership leverages a really precious form of private investment, which is homeowner mortgages. Homeowners in our program are the debt because their mortgages pay for about half the cost. So we are leveraging 50% equity from our of our own homeowners who get mortgages on their homes. So that's the main source of leverage. We do get some philanthropic dollars project to project that is also a leverage. Big grants like from Chase. Not for this project yet. We haven't even started that part of the process yet.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
I'm not terribly well versed, but I think there's a Friends of Magnuson Park, and then there is the neighborhood. How is everybody working? How well is everybody working with you?
I can speak to that. So we actually have a Magnuson Place collaborative. It really plays a great relationship with our community in the sense that it's a collaboration between the schools, anything from high school all the way to the elementary schools, and the daycare center, the clinics, every single agency that's at the park. We meet quarterly and we really kind of talk about the different things that are happening at the park that we want, not just our residents, but their residents and any partner around involved. And so it's a very active relationship, very active community. I believe we meet tomorrow morning, actually. It's our quarterly meeting. And so there's a lot of active relationship going on. They play a big role as well in that block party with the University Sunrise Rotary that happens every year, and they're involved from anything from the planning to the execution of it all.
I would just add to that. In every community, there are going to be supporters, and there are going to be detractors from affordable housing, and that community's no exception to that. I think I am proud of the work that we've done and the work that we've done to be really a vital part of the community, and I think that shows in that I think we have far more supporters than we have detractors in the community. So, but I wish there would be a day where everybody would say yes in my backyard for affordable housing, but that day is not here. So the fight goes on. So.
And we're just getting connected to all this network, so there's a lot of connectivity that's just happened tonight, and we're looking forward to working with you all.
Thank you. I impressed by this, the plot that you had up on the screen, but the total number, am I understanding right that these are individual houses? And so there's total is what, half a dozen or 8 or 10 or something like that, individual houses?
In the trust or in that Sandpoint?
In that Sandpoint project.
50 individual homes.
50?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I didn't see the picture properly then.
Yeah, it was color coordinated, and there were 16 ones, 24 twos, and 20 three-bedroom units. So a total of 50 units with a mix of unit types.
Okay.
Some were duplexes or
Yeah, the one-bedroom units that you saw at the top would likely have, a couple shared walls. One component of this project that Frank, was going to lead a charge on was zoning. And, there's changes coming to Seattle zoning code. And when you talk to Frank, he would just say, oh, it doesn't matter. We can do whatever we want. For us, we have a little bit less leverage to do whatever we want. So we have to play, without Frank being able to do whatever he wants, we're going to have to play a little bit more into zoning code and, play by the rules a little bit more. But, typically in our model, we'll have sometimes a mix, shared walls and some individual units. It is a little bit more cost effective to do those shared walls, just reduces construction costs a little bit and allows us to produce, nominally more units on the same site.
Well, one tip from a guy who worked with Frank at the very beginning on the board of the organization that he stood up, never underestimate the power of the faith community in the neighborhood
Churches.
area.
Yep.
We had a point where actually it was Joe's predecessor at Mercy who was in charge of also housing at the time, and he yanked $500,000 from us that was guaranteed originally in the turnover. And my wife was a member of the Sandpoint Methodist Church up the hill, and I got friendly with the pastor, and we heard the news on Friday. By Sunday, we had about 500 signatures in support of the program.
Yeah. Thank you for your advocacy.
I couldn't quite tell from the map. The single-family housing would be going into that southwest corner? Is that?
The whole thing would be single family housing. So each individual unit has its own standalone setup. As you go south, the 2 and 3 bedroom units were more programmed towards the south of the site. The 1 bedroom, little more dense units were programmed towards the north end of the site, but they'd all be single family community land trust style homes that would be sold individually, to an income qualified buyer.
So it would border the south end and Sandpoint Way, right? That corner?
Yeah, along the west side of the site, there's a break between where the site ends and where Sandpoint starts. There's like an access road and like a green strip. So it wouldn't be right on Sandpoint. It's pulled back 50, 60 feet, for that access road and that green strip. But yeah, you'd have housing that flanks, all along the Sandpoint side, wraps around the north, and then comes back down the east side. In the middle was, courtyard, outdoor area, and then to the south was more parking. You programmed quite a bit of parking at the south.
One of the things we talked about that was less important to Frank, but it's kind of important to us, is this whole food desert thing. And we think that if we're adding another 55 homes at the property, that maybe there's something we could do. Take advantage of the new proposed corner store zoning that City of Seattle is proposing for their comp plan to get some type of destination type of food retail into the neighborhood to serve them.
And back to zoning, when we told that idea to Frank, he said, "Oh yeah, no problem.
Yeah,
No problem. Yeah, you're going to be fine."
You don't have to worry about that.
I keep winking at our representatives because now they're going to take that over and take care of that for us. So. Are there other questions?
They sure did. Yay!
I just wondered, you've described 2 large multifamily projects where there's an underlying ownership of the land and the people are leasing. Is there any program that would assist, let's say, a widow who doesn't have the income to stay in their homeowner project or home and is going to have to leave because she doesn't have the income to maintain it?
In the city of Seattle, there's a huge movement to try to protect legacy Black homeowners, and a program that would benefit them would probably lay the groundwork for helping other folks as well. But this is a huge issue of people aging in place, not being able to afford their property taxes. Sometimes they've paid their mortgage off a long time ago, but the property taxes are killing them. And there's a whole coalition of folks that are working together to create a toolkit of solutions to help folks hang on to their home and be able to age in place. Whether it's build a dadu in their backyard, a small second unit, and let the homeowner move into that smaller space, which could be set up for aging in place better than their own home, and then they could lease out their own home, but they get to stay at the property that they've lived at for. So lots of different versions of solutions that can work for different folks. But you can watch for the conversation. I'm sure we gave a couple of awards to different groups at our fall fundraiser last year. Black Legacy Homeowners and I'm forgetting the name of it. It's had numbers in it. But there's that, and then people from the city of Seattle and the Black Home Initiative are all working a lot on those issues. So it's not a one size fits all. It's usually tailored to the individual situation.
I think that we own a big round of applause to Peter for organizing this program tonight. Peter's had a commitment to a long time for this housing himself.
Someone
this is
handed me
something.
the microphone, and I'm not going to speak.
Okay, but he has been involved in low-income housing and really committed to it for a long time, and he has the clout and the presence to bring such wonderful people to be here tonight with us. So I just think that we need to. He is our person on the Neighborhoods Committee who keeps us grounded and thinking about what's happening with housing in the neighborhoods we look at. And thank you, Peter, for doing that for us tonight. And thank you all for spending the evening with us. What a delight. People are telling me, Ginny, this is a wonderful program, and it has been. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.